unraveling secrets in the heart of Singapore, one thread at a time. This is True Crime Threads, where ordinary lives hide extraordinary lies. In the bustling city of Singapore, life for 34-year-old Mei Ling was a predictable rhythm of work, family, and errands. Married to her husband, Wei Jie, for 10 years, she trusted him completely. Their life seemed ordinary: a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a daughter in primary school, and weekends spent at the park or visiting family. Wei Jie worked long hours as a sales manager, often coming home late, but Mei Ling never questioned his dedication. He was a loving father and a dependable partner, or so she thought. Their days blended into a comforting routine, and Mei Ling had no reason to suspect that her world was built on anything but honesty and trust. One Saturday morning, Mei Ling woke up early to prepare breakfast for her daughter, Xiaomin, before heading out to run errands. Wei Jie had left earlier, claiming he had a work meeting. Mei Ling didn't think much of it. His job often required weekend commitments. After dropping Xiaomin off at her parents' house, Mei Ling drove to her usual grocery store, a bustling supermarket she frequented every week. She moved through the aisles with practiced ease, picking up vegetables, rice, and a few snacks. As she reached for a packet of rice in the dry goods aisle, she glanced up and froze. There, in the next aisle, was Wei Jie. But he wasn't alone. He was holding hands with a woman Mei Ling had never seen before. The woman was petite, with short hair and a bright smile, and beside her stood a young boy, no older than 6, who was tugging at Wei Jie's sleeve and calling him Papa. Mei Ling's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, convinced she was imagining things, but the scene before her was unmistakable. Wei Jie laughed at something the boy said, his face glowing with a warmth she recognized all too well. The woman leaned into him, her hand resting comfortably on his arm, as if this was their everyday reality. Mei Ling's stomach churned. She felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Panic set in. Mei Ling dropped her basket, the sound of it hitting the floor barely registering in her ears. She turned and hurried out of the store, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. How could this be happening? Who were they? How long had this been going on? Questions flooded her thoughts, each one more painful than the last. She stumbled to her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys. Sitting in the driver's seat, she replayed the scene in her mind, searching for any sign she might have missed, any clue that could have prepared her for this moment. But there was nothing. Wei Jie had always been attentive, always present. Or so she had believed. As she drove home, Mei Ling's shock began to give way to anger. How could he betray her like this? How could he lie to her face every day, pretending to be a devoted husband and father while living another life entirely? And the boy, how old was he? 6? 7? The timeline made her feel sick. Had Wei Jie been leading a double life for years, right under her nose? By the time she reached her apartment, Mei Ling's tears had dried, replaced by a steely determination. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to rest until she uncovered the truth. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would unravel everything she thought she knew about the man she had married. Over the next few days, Mei Ling became a woman obsessed. The image of Wei Jie with the woman and the boy played on a loop in her mind, haunting her every waking moment. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and found herself staring blankly at her daughter Xiaoming during meals, her thoughts miles away. She knew she had to act, but confronting Wei Jie directly felt too risky. What if he denied everything? What if he had an explanation that would somehow make her doubt what she had seen? Mei Ling couldn't afford to be gaslit, not when her entire world had been turned upside down. She needed proof, something concrete that would force him to admit the truth. Her first step was to go through Wei Jie's belongings. Late one night, after he had fallen asleep, She carefully unlocked his phone using the passcode she had memorized years ago. Her hands shook as she scrolled through his messages, call logs, and emails, but to her frustration she found nothing suspicious. Wei Jie had either been incredibly careful or had a separate phone she didn't know about. The next day, Mei Ling decided to follow him. She called in sick to work and waited outside his office building, her heart pounding as she watched him leave at the end of the day. But Wei Jie didn't go anywhere unusual. He stopped at a hawker center for dinner, then drove straight home, just as he always did. Mei Ling felt a mix of relief and frustration. Was it possible she had imagined the whole thing? No, she couldn't let herself doubt what she had seen. There had to be more to the story. Desperate for answers, Mei Ling turned to the internet searching for private investigators in Singapore. She found Raj, a seasoned professional with glowing reviews and a reputation for discretion. After a brief phone call, she arranged to meet him at a quiet cafe. Raj listened intently as Mei Ling recounted her story, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp with interest. He assured her he could help, but warned that the process might take time. Mei Ling didn't care about the cost or the wait. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Raj's investigation began immediately. He started by tracking Wei Jie's movements, using a combination of surveillance and digital forensics. Within days, he uncovered shocking details. The woman Mei Ling had seen at the grocery store was named Xiao Hui, and the boy was her son, Li Wei. Raj discovered that Wei Jie had been living a double life for nearly 7 years. He had married Xiao Hui in a small ceremony using forged documents to keep the marriage hidden from Mei Ling. The two families lived just 20 minutes apart, yet Wei Jie had managed to keep them completely separate, balancing his time and resources with meticulous precision. Mei Ling was devastated but also strangely relieved. At least now she knew she wasn't going crazy. Raj continued to dig deeper, uncovering bank accounts Wei Jie had opened in Xiao Hui's name, and a second phone he used exclusively to communicate with her. The evidence was overwhelming, but Mei Ling still couldn't bring herself to confront Wei Jie. She needed to understand why he had done this, how he had managed to deceive her for so long. And most importantly, she needed to decide what to do next. The life she had known was gone, but the fight to reclaim her future was just beginning. Raj's investigation revealed that Wei Jie's second wife, Xiao He, was entirely unaware of Mei Ling's existence. To Xiao He, Wei Jie was a devoted husband and father who occasionally traveled for work but always made time for his family. She had no reason to doubt him. He was present for their son's school events, helped with homework, and even attended parent-teacher meetings. Xiao Hui's life revolved around their small family, and she believed Wei Jie's frequent absences were simply part of his demanding job. She had no idea that his business trips were often just a cover for him to spend time with Mei Ling and their daughter. The revelation left Mei Ling torn. On one hand, she felt a deep sense of betrayal and anger toward Xiao Hui for being part of Wei Jie's deception, even unknowingly. On the other hand, she couldn't help but pity the other woman, who was just as much a victim as she was. Mei Ling spent hours agonizing over whether to confront Xiao Hui. Part of her wanted to expose Wei Jie's lies, to make him face the consequences of his actions. But another part of her hesitated, knowing the pain it would cause Xiao Hui and her son. Mei Ling couldn't shake the image of the little boy calling Wei Jie Papa. He was innocent in all of this, just like her own daughter. The thought of shattering his world filled her with guilt. Yet Mei Ling knew she couldn't keep living in the shadows, pretending everything was fine. She needed closure, and that meant uncovering the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. Meanwhile, Wei Jie began to sense that something was off. Mei Ling's behavior had changed. She was quieter, more distant, and often lost in thought. She stopped asking about his work or his day. and her once warm smiles had been replaced by a guarded expression. Wei Ji tried to brush it off, telling himself she was just stressed or tired. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something. He started covering his tracks more carefully, deleting messages from Xiao Hui and avoiding certain areas of the city where he might run into Mei Ling. He even began leaving his second phone at work, hidden in a locked drawer, just in case Mei Ling decided to search their home again. The tension in their household grew, with both of them walking on eggshells, waiting for the other to make a move. At the same time, Xiao Hui noticed subtle changes in Wei Ji's behavior as well. He seemed more distracted, less present, even when he was physically there. He would often excuse himself to take phone calls, claiming they were work-related. But Xiao Hui couldn't help but wonder. She trusted him, but a small seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to grow. She started paying closer attention to his habits, noticing little inconsistencies that she had previously overlooked. The once solid foundation of their relationship was beginning to crack, though neither of them was ready to admit it. As the days passed, Mei Ling grew more determined to confront the truth. She knew she couldn't keep living in limbo, torn between anger and pity, between the life she had and the life she deserved. She began to formulate a plan, one that would force Wei Ji to face the consequences of his actions while minimizing the collateral damage to Xiao He and her son. It was a delicate balance, but Mei Ling was resolved to see it through. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change all of their lives forever. One evening, after weeks of agonizing over her decision, Mei Ling finally reached her breaking point. She could no longer carry the weight of Wei Ji's secret alone. The thought of confronting Xiao He filled her with dread, but she knew it was the only way to expose the truth and begin healing. With a heavy heart, she drove to Xiao He's flat, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as she rehearsed what she would say. The journey felt endless, each traffic light and turn amplifying her anxiety. When she arrived, she sat in her car for several minutes, staring at the building where Wei Ji had built another life. Finally, she mustered the courage to step out and approach the door. Xiao Hui answered after a few knocks, her expression friendly but curious. Mei Ling introduced herself as Wei Ji's wife, and the color drained from Xiao Hui's face. For a moment, neither woman spoke, the weight of the revelation hanging heavily between them. Xiao Hui stepped aside, allowing Mei Ling to enter, and the two women sat down in the modest living room. The air was thick with tension as Mei Ling began to explain who she was and what she had discovered. Xiao Hui listened in stunned silence, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Wei Ji's frequent absences, his vague explanations, the second phone he always seemed to be checking. Xiao Hui's world crumbled around her, just as Mei Ling's had weeks earlier. As the two women compared their stories, a strange sense of camaraderie began to form. They realized they were both victims of Wei Ji's elaborate deception, each living half a life while he moved seamlessly between them. Mei Ling showed Xiao Hui the evidence Raj had gathered, photos, bank statements, and even a copy of the forged marriage certificate Wei Ji had used to marry Xiao Hui. The depth of his lies was staggering, and both women felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and profound sadness. They talked for hours, sharing their experiences and trying to make sense of how one man could have manipulated them so completely. By the end of the conversation, Mei Ling and Xiao Hui had reached an unspoken understanding. They were no longer adversaries but allies, united by their shared pain and determination to hold Wei Ji accountable. Together, they devised a plan to confront him. They decided to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe where they could finally demand answers. Mei Ling texted Wei Ji, pretending to be Zhao Hui, and arranged the meeting for the following evening. Wei Jie, unaware of the trap that had been set, agreed without hesitation. The night before the confrontation, neither woman slept. Mei Ling lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. Xiao Wei sat on her sofa, holding a photo of her son, and wondering how she would explain the truth to him. Both women knew their lives were about to change forever, but they also knew they couldn't continue living in the shadow of Wei Jie's lies. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would force Wei Jie to face the consequences of his actions and allow Mei Ling and Xiao Hui to begin reclaiming their lives. The day of the confrontation arrived, and the atmosphere in the cafe was tense. Mei Ling and Xiao Hui sat at a corner table, their hands clasped tightly as they waited for Wei Jie to arrive. The cafe was quiet, with only the soft hum of background music and the occasional clink of cups breaking the silence. Mei Ling's heart pounded in her chest, her nerves frayed but her resolve unwavering. Xiao Hui, though visibly shaken, held her head high, determined to face the man who had deceived them both. When Wei Jie walked in, he was smiling, expecting to see only Xiao Hui. The smile vanished the moment he noticed Mei Ling sitting beside her. His steps faltered, and for a moment he looked as though he might turn and leave. But it was too late. The two women had already locked eyes with him, their expressions a mix of anger, hurt, and determination. Wei Jie approached the table cautiously, his mind racing to come up with an explanation, a way to talk his way out of the situation. But before he could speak, Mei Ling began. She laid out the evidence Raj had gathered, her voice steady but laced with emotion. She recounted the day at the grocery store, the private investigator's findings, and the pain of discovering his double life. Xiao Hui followed, her voice trembling as she described how Wei Jie had built a life with her, all while hiding the truth about Mei Ling and their daughter. The weight of their words hung heavily in the air, and Wei Jie's initial attempts to deny everything crumbled under the sheer volume of evidence. His face paled as he realized there was no way to spin the truth this time. For the first time, Wei Jie seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he had done. He slumped in his chair, his shoulders heavy with guilt, and began to cry. He admitted to everything, the lies, the deceit, the years of manipulation. He claimed he had never meant to hurt either of them, that he had been trapped in a web of his own making and didn't know how to escape. But his tears and apologies did little to soften the hearts of the two women sitting across from him. Mei Ling and Xiao Hui had heard enough. They had spent weeks grappling with the betrayal, and now, seeing Wei Jie's remorse, they realized it changed nothing. The trust was gone, and with it any chance of reconciliation. Mei Ling was the first to speak. She told Wei Jie that their marriage was over, and that she would be filing for divorce. Xiao Hui echoed her sentiments, stating that she wanted nothing more to do with him. Both women made it clear that they would be seeking full custody of their children, ensuring that Wei Jie's influence would be limited in their lives moving forward. Wei Jie pleaded with them to reconsider, but his words fell on deaf ears. The damage was irreparable, and the two women were resolute in their decision to move on without him. As they left the cafe, Mei Ling and Xiao Hui shared a quiet moment of solidarity. They had faced the man who had shattered their lives and emerged stronger for it. Though their paths would diverge, they knew they would always share a bond forged in the fire of betrayal. For Mei Ling, the journey ahead was daunting, but it was also a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. For Wei Jie, the reckoning was just beginning. A stark reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface.